Here at First Congregational Church, our home church here, where they have been welcoming us for, I forget how many years and how many concerts, but longer than you? Okay, but Brian has been so helpful, and now this space has become a real center for music in the community, so we're really excited to be a part of that. And today we have a really exciting program. It's called Musical Mothers, and it sort of has a double meaning today because many of you were expecting to see Emmanuel and his sister Frances on this program, but unfortunately Frances has an injury to her thumb that she got a few weeks ago and was not able to come up. But it turns out Frances has a very musical mother, Cecilia Barczyk, who is a phenomenal cellist. You can read her bio on the back. Won the Tchaikovsky competition, studied in Warsaw and in Moscow, and so she has subbed in very nicely, and it really sort of fits the program idea as well. It's great for her to be able to play with her son Emmanuel as well. And this is a program with some incredible women composers, many of whom have been forgotten, sadly, and neglected, and it is our responsibility to bring this music to you as much as we can. We try to do at least 2 of these kind of programs every year, and then include as many women composers as we can in all of our shows. And whenever I do a concert of women composers, I always feel compelled to start with some really bad quotes by men about women, to make clear what these women had to deal with in their time, because it was always a struggle for these women to get their voices heard, still a struggle in many ways. But we can go all the way back to Aristotle, the great Greek philosopher, who said, "A woman is an unfinished man who, like children and barbarians, are not competent in the ways of thinking." Boo. You can boo, go ahead, boo him. We jump to Hans von Bülow, a very famous conductor in the 19th century, whose wife was actually stolen by Richard Wagner, so that was nice, but he said the following: "Reproductive genius can be admitted to the pretty sex, but productive genius unconditionally cannot. There will never be a woman composer, at best a misprinting copyist. I do not believe in the feminine form of the word creator." Ooh. We'll jump into George Upton, an English writer who wrote a book called Woman in Music, which you might think would be a great book about what women have done, but the whole book is about how women have been inspirations for men to write music. And here he says the following: "Not only are women too emotional and lacking in stamina to write music, but a woman's mind simply cannot grasp the scientific logic of music making. It does not seem that woman will ever originate music in its fullest and grandest harmonic forms. She will always be the recipient and the interpreter, but there is no hope she will be the creator."
You haven't read these things to your daughters,
No, well, I have, just so they know what's out there. So all of this is, of course, garbage. There have been women composers for centuries. We go back to Hildegard von Bingen in the 12th century, a mystical writer who wrote some incredible chants. In the Renaissance, people like Francesca Caccini and Barbara Strozzi. The Baroque period, Isabella Leonardo. The Classical period with Mariana Martinez, Mariana von Auerberger. There are many more. And in the early Romantic period, 2 very famous women, Clara Schumann, who married Robert Schumann, and Fanny Mendelssohn, who was the sister of Felix Mendelssohn. And what's so sad about these sort of quotes is how it got internalized by many of these women. So Clara, who had written some amazing works when she was 15 and 16 years old, still the harmonies in those are astounding. Once she got together with Robert, she actually wrote in her diary that it would be arrogant of her to think that she could be the first woman composer. And she really stopped writing for most of the marriage to her husband. And Fanny kept writing, even though nobody was listening to her music. She wrote over 400 pieces that we know. We're still discovering some of them, and they are incredible works. But she said the following: "When one never encounters either objective criticism or goodwill, one eventually loses the critical sense needed to judge one's own work, while at the same time losing the wish to create it. I am more or less alone with my music." So it's a real tragedy that a lot of these women sort of gave up without getting their voices heard. We have a wonderful quote from Amy Fay, who was a fantastic pianist who studied with Franz Liszt, and I think she got a lot of it right in her quote. This is from 1878. Women have been too much taken up with helping and encouraging men instead of placing a proper value on their own talent, which they are too prone to underestimate and to think not worth making the most of. Ruskin was quite right when he so patronizingly said that woman's chief function is to praise. She has praised and praised and praised and kept herself in abeyance. Women are now beginning to realize that they too have brains, even musical ones. It has required 50,000 years to produce a male Beethoven. Surely one little century ought to be allowed to create a female one. Yay! Okay, so we are going to begin with the sort of grande dame of American women, and that is Amy Beach, who happened to come from New Hampshire. She was born Amy Cheney, and she grew up in Henniker, New Hampshire. And by her mom's account, was an incredibly musical child. When she was 1 year old, she was singing 40 melodies to her mother. At the age of 2, she was singing harmonies to those melodies. By age 3, she was playing the piano. And at age 4, she wrote her first piece of music. And then when she was about 7 or 8, their family friend, the poet Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, happened to visit, and he heard Amy Cheney playing on the piano. And he was so blown away that he basically said to the parents, "You have to get out of New Hampshire," which is not nice, but they had to go to some place where she could get better training. And so they moved down to Boston because of that, and she was able to get piano training from some teachers at the New England Conservatory of Music. She was not able to get any composition training because women were not allowed to get any training in composition at this time. So she, like many of the people that we're going to do on this program, was self-taught. She had to learn composing by looking at the scores of Mozart and Beethoven and others and to see how they composed music. And she really just sort of learned it on her own. And in many ways, it was a good thing because she didn't have some professor putting red X's through her music if they didn't like it. She got to sort of be very creative with her harmonies, and you can hear that in this piece, and especially in the final piece we're going to do by Pajacevich, how that sort of freedom allowed some new ideas to seep in. She made her debut as a pianist, her concert debut, with the Boston Symphony when she was 16 years old, playing the Mendelssohn Piano Concerto. And apparently the conductor took a rather slow tempo, thinking this was a young girl who couldn't keep up. And she said, "I didn't realize that he was trying to spare me, but I did know that the tempo was dragging, so I had to swing the orchestra into the correct time." So she was a pretty confident young lady, and I think would have had a major career as a pianist touring around the world. There were several important women at the time, like Amy Faye, who did this. But she ended up marrying a much older man when she was 18 years old. He was a doctor. Dr. Henry Harris Aubrey Beach was his name. And all through her life, when she composed music, she composed it as Mrs. H.H.A. Beach. She put that on all her music. But the doctor, he worked at the Mass General Hospital. He was an important surgeon. I think he was one of the first to use ether in his surgery in the United States. But he didn't believe that it was the proper thing for a wife of his, they lived on Commonwealth Avenue in a very hoity-toity area, that she should not be making money as a pianist touring around the world. So he basically forbade her from playing concerts, except maybe 1 or 2 charity concerts a year that she could put on. And he definitely said, you can't be teaching piano to anybody because that's not of your stature. He did allow her to compose music. I think he probably thought, she'll never compose, there's no women who know how to compose. But she ended up really delving into the composition part, and in 1892 she wrote her Mass in E-flat major. This was the first Mass that had been performed by any woman by the Handel and Haydn Society of Boston that had been around for over 100 years. They put this Mass on. It became a huge hit in New England. And then 4 years later, she wrote her Gaelic Symphony. You can still hear the symphony on YouTube if you want. It's a phenomenal piece of music. Gaelic Symphony from 1896. I think it's one of the best symphonies ever written by an American composer. Certainly one of the best of this time until probably the 20s and 30s. Just an amazing, powerful piece of work. And many composers happened to be at this concert, including George Chadwick, who is the director of the New England Conservatory of Music, where they weren't allowing women to get any composition lessons. And he wrote her a letter. "I always feel a thrill of pride whenever I hear a fine work written by any of us. As such, I think we have to count you, whether you like it or not, as one of the boys." So she sort of joined in with this group called the Second New England School with George Chadwick, Arthur Foote, John Knowles Payne, none of whom were all that great composers, but Amy Beach was by far the best. But it allowed her to sort of circulate in the right places. She helped start the MacDowell Colony in Peterborough, New Hampshire, which still exists as kind of refuge for artists. And then her music started getting played in Europe. And in fact, we have one review by a German critic who said the following after hearing the Gaelic Symphony. We have before us undeniably a possessor of musical gifts of the highest kind, a musical nature touched with genius. She is the first American of any kind able to compose music of a European quality of excellence. So she was celebrated wherever she went, and ultimately her husband does die, I think, in 1910 or so, and she's able to have a career playing piano around Europe as well and doing that part of her life. She would also start these things called beach clubs. These were sort of clubs for young women to have teaching and mentoring by other women in the musical profession and for young kids to come and learn at these clubs. And then she was the first president of the Society of American Women Composers. In 2000, the Boston Pops put her name on the hatch shell at the Esplanade there, in the first woman joining 86 other men on that shell. First woman to get her name up there. And then in 2017, the mayor of Boston proclaimed her birthday, which is September 5th, Amy Beach Day. So you can celebrate Amy Beach Day in September 5th. She is beginning to really be heard more, and we urge you to listen to some of her great music, especially that symphony. We're going to do a shorter piece of hers called The Romance, written in, I think, 1893, and it shows just the lyricism, the expression of her, and these waves of just amazing, powerful climaxes that sort of take your breath away at times. So please welcome to the stage, Mr. Emmanuel Borowski. Woo!